Hello. Today we are going to be speaking about Doreen Massey, who also is a very significant thinker on space. As you can tell from the book that I'm going to discuss today, For Space, a very explicit title, that we are going to be speaking about her concepts related to space, and primarily what she is asking us to do is to investigate our unthought out notions about space. When you think of space, usually you imagine it as a backdrop. Sometimes people think of it in terms of a map, a representation, something that is static, something that is out there. On the other hand, she wants us to think about space as something that is dynamic, very much like the concepts we've been speaking about from Harvey, from Lefebvre. Let's go on to see what Doreen Massey has to say about this. So Doreen Massey was born in the late 1940s, and during a time when she was benefiting from and experienced good state welfare programs. She was born in a working class family. Her father was a factory worker, her mother worked at a shop, and despite belonging to a working class family, growing up in a working class neighborhood, she benefited from public education, public health care, and went on to study at Oxford. And she really kind of reminiscences about that time and how it enabled her and many others. Then she goes on to witness in her life increasing globalization, what Harvey calls time-space compression, but also alongside that, the more parochial notion of place that emerges from it. The pushback against globalization comes in the form of more xenophobic and more parochial notions about a supposedly uncorrupted identity of place. So these are the two ideas, largely this free-moving, neoliberal, financial globalization that pretty much knows no limits, and the idea of place as this bounded, parochial, somehow a priori notion without maybe a moving history is what she is critiquing. She's written several books. I've put up a few here. After she graduates with her master's, she joins the Center for Environmental Studies, and there she does a lot of work on what she's witnessing in terms of deindustrialization of England in late 70s and 80s. And from all of this emerges a critique of the industrial location theory and also her understanding of the spatial divisions of labor. Doreen Massey is also known as one of the pioneers in the subdiscipline of feminist geography. And then the work that we are going to be talking about today, For Space, and her later work on World City. I want to begin with something that she writes in her preface, where she is reminding herself and ourselves of a time when she was a little kid growing up in Manchester in this working class neighborhood, and she would keep a globe in front of her, close her eyes and kind of spin it, and then without looking put her hand point a finger to one spot on the globe, and then spend quite some time imagining what life would be like in that part of the world. What would people be doing there at this particular time? What season would it be? And so on. And then she would repeat that to many other places. And what she found most fascinating about this was that at the same time, there are multiple things going on and multiple ways in which people are experiencing their space and place. And she brings, some of these ruminations, some of these thinkings to the later work. One of the reasons why she's doing it is also because she says that we don't have the vocabulary to politically challenge some of the ways of thinking about the world, which are also becoming some of the ways in which the world is being formed. And so you need the vocabulary in order to push for an alternative vision. So to develop that vocabulary, she starts off with 3 ruminations, again also highlighting that these are things that she thinks about a lot. And so she's ruminating, and she begins with three ruminations. The first one is about Tenochtitlan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, pardon me if I'm not, but this is where the current Mexico City is. But at that point that she is writing in the early, about that which she is writing in the early 16th century, this was one of the largest cities in the world and ruled by the Aztecs. So, what we have up here, an illustration for space, is a mapping or a cosmological mapping, you can say that, of Tenochtitlan. It's the Aztec depiction of their world. And then I'm going to read out how she's writing about it. The Aztecs are talking about the invading armies, and let's see how they're talking about it. So she writes, the armies are approaching the city from the quarter named the Reed or Crocodile, the direction in which the sun rises. And they were arriving from the geographical direction which in these time spaces was held to be of authority. It was also the year 1 Reed, a year of both historical and cosmological significance, a particular point in the cycle of years. So it's year 1 Reed, it's a particular point in a cosmological time scale and which signified change. So this is how the Aztecs are reading the arriving of the army, right? Let's see how the army is viewing it. So this is, I have again a quote from the Three Ruminations and in the book, and she writes describing how Cortes, who is leading the army, is thinking about this and the others. These voyages originally had set out towards the west in the hope of finding east. Cristobal Colon had headed across the great emptiness, mark these words, west of Christendom. He had accepted the challenge of the legend. Terrible storms would play with his ships as if they were nutshells and hurl them into the jaws of monsters. So this shows that, they overcame a lot of challenges to get here, to conquer space. The men in the approaching army could hardly believe their eyes when they first looked down upon the city. They had heard that it was splendid, but this was 5 times the size of Madrid, a thriving empire, a thriving city. The way today we often tell stories or any of the tales of voyages of discovery, it is in terms of crossing and conquering space. Cortes voyaged across space, found Tenochtitlan and took it. This idea that there is an empty space, pretty much. There is a surface on which you travel and then you conquer it, as if the surface itself is devoid of meaning. So you see the difference in the whole cosmological world of the Aztecs and those of the conquerors, right? So she says that this imagination is a limited imagination, and if we continue to imagine space as a surface, then we are losing out on more, maybe the diverse imaginations of space that there could be, such as she showed was with the Aztecs. So she says, what might it mean to reorient this imagination, to question that habit of thinking of space as surface? If instead we conceive of a meeting up of histories, that there was a history and imagination that existed in the Aztec world, and there is a history and imagination, a worldview that the Spanish are bringing, and this war is actually a meeting up of these histories. But that is not how it's been looked at, right? It's been looked at as a one-way voyage of discovery. What happens to our implicit imaginations of time and space? Let's look at the second rumination that she has. And in the second rumination, she basically challenges this idea that globalization, or specifically the neoliberal financialized version of globalization, is basically unstoppable. We hear this many a times, all pervading. In fact, she quotes a Clinton speech on this where he is trying to tell us that globalization is a force that we cannot stop, much like the force of gravity. By a statement like this, what he's doing is naturalizing globalization, as if this was inevitable, as if this was the only possibility, that there was no other alternative. Now, again, what she said with the first rumination is that such a thinking limits our imagination, and we are unable to see other ways in which history could unfold, right? And she says ways in which we imagine space have consequences, because then those manifestation, those imaginations also take shape, they manifest, right? So she says what statements such as Clinton's are doing is attempting to persuade us that there is no alternative. She says this is a project. This is not a description of the world as it is, so much as an image in which the world is being made. I mean, think about all the organizations, NATO, WTO, all of them that are actually working to create the world in this particular image. So it's not like something that is happening automatically. And then I have put up a map up here of IMF, breaking down countries into advanced capitalist economies, into the developed world, middle developed world, and the less developed world. And this kind of an argument, Massey says, what it does is it like positions everybody onto a particular trajectory of globalization. There are those that are further ahead and are the well-developed capitalist economies. And then in that same trajectory, there are others that are bottom below. So they are more backward. So in some ways, what it is doing, and she says, is this proposition turns geography into history. Space also has a temporal framework then. Some places are forward and other places are backward. Space into time. And this again has social and political effects. So this is what we need to think about. This is what we can't just uncritically and without thinking have notions about space, or for any that matter anything, right? Things need to be consciously thought about how and why particular imaginations come to place. So she says, what if we refuse to convene space into time? What if we open up the imagination of the single narrative to give space literally for a multiplicity of trajectories? There can be so many different possibilities in which places can move. But why is this notion of a free globalization, of a free moving finance capital actually limiting that? Let's come to the third rumination, and here she takes up the notion of place. As a pushback towards this ever-expanding globalization and capitalism, which some argue is erasing what was quintessential to local places, there is a sense of going back to pre-globalized time, to going back to what is the authenticity of the place. She says that be careful about these kind of ideas and notions. And I'll read out from her. She says there are often shared undergirding assumptions of place as closed, as coherent, as integrated, as authentic, as home, a secure retreat. But think about it, when was this ever so? Places have usually always been connected, and places are also dynamic. They are also ever changing. The change might come from within, the change might come from outside. So which authentic will you go back to? Let me read out again from her chapter on propositions. She writes, what then if we refuse this imagination? What then, not only of the nationalisms and parochialisms which we might gladly see thereby undermined, but also of the notion of local struggles or of the defense of place more generally? And what if we refuse that distinction, all too appealing, it seems, between place as meaningful, lived and everyday, and space as outside, abstract and meaningless? I mean, she sees space also as having multiple trajectories, as having meanings, as something that is also what we create and what creates us, as something that is dynamic. Now, based on these three ruminations, she wants us to consider three propositions. Proposition 1, and I'm going to read out these propositions because I think she words them beautifully, and they are from her chapter on propositions, which is one of the first chapters in the book for space. She says, let's see space as a product of interrelations. Space does not exist prior to identities. entities and their relations. More generally, I would argue that identities / entities, the relations between them and the spatiality which is part of them are co-constitutive. I mean, just imagine, we perform particular roles and have particular relations in a space, and therefore the space acquires meaning based on the relations that are there. Similarly, the space itself is shaping the way those relations can unfold. So that these relational identities and space as relational are both being co-constituted. So this is the idea that she wants us to replace the idea of space as backdrop. The second proposition, space as the sphere of the possibility of the existence of multiplicity, that multiple trajectories can unfold. It is not one linear graph where a backward place has to reach a forward place. A genuine, thorough spatialization of social theory and political thinking can force into the imagination of a fuller recognition of the simultaneous coexistence of others with their own trajectories and their own stories to tell. The imagination of globalization as a historical cue. Some places are forward, some places are backward. The imagination of globalization as a historical cue does not recognize the simultaneous experience, the simultaneous coexistence of other histories with characteristics that are distinct, which does not imply unconnected, and futures which potentially may be so too, like which also potentially can be distinct, can be different from that one trajectory of financialized, globalized capitalism to which we don't have another possibility. So, actually looking at the world or looking at space with this kind of a notion opens up possibilities for us, right? It opens up the possibility of imagining a different world. The third proposition that she has for us is imagining space as always in process. And she writes, the frameworks of progress, of development and of modernization and the succession of modes of production elaborated within Marxism. That also, right? Modes of production is a linear history. We start off with slavery and feudalism, and then we come to capitalism. So, and then it's supposed to go to socialism and communism. So there is a already predefined path which she rejects. She says, all-purpose scenarios in which the general directions of history, including the future, are already known. A space then, which is neither a container for always already constituted identities, nor a completed closure of holism. This is a space of loose ends and missing links. For the future to be open, space must be open too. A very important line. For us to be able to imagine possible futures which are open, which are not already predetermined and predestined, our understanding or our imagination of space also has to be open. She uses the term, sometimes she uses the term spatial imagination and sometimes she uses the term geographical imagination. And I'm going to try and give a little bit of a difference, although don't take this as too much of a clear distinction, but yet I think it makes the politics a little bit clearer if I do that. So spatial imagination, especially the unconscious or the unobserved kind of spatial imagination that we all carry, is basically what she terms as spatial imagination. She says these are often inherited, unconscious habits that we have where we think of space as flat, as static, as empty, and place as closed, as authentic, and the idea where space turns into time, or geography is actually telling of a history where some places are forward and backward. She says instead we are also asking to develop a geographical imagination which is about how we imagine the world, where we can imagine a multiplicity of coexisting trajectories. There is a recognition of coevalness. Coevalness is a concept again that Doreen Massey gives to talk about the simultaneous coexistence at the same time of multiple trajectories, of multiple histories, of multiple possibilities, which are relational and interdependent, not closed. And this, she says, is an ethical political orientation. It's a political project that she's participating in to conceptualize, to help us conceptualize space as this open, processual, heterogeneous, so that we can imagine alternative political possibilities also. So that's the idea for which Doreen Massey is working. Now, I want to introduce a few keywords that Doreen Massey uses in For Space, which I think actually give us a good spatial vocabulary in order to understand some of the processes for which we may not have a word. And therefore, to be able to articulate something is also to be able to explain it, understand it, and then therefore make sense of it. So one of these words that she gives us is called thrown togetherness. For thrown togetherness, Doreen Massey writes, instead of imagining places as areas with boundaries around, they can be imagined as articulated moments in networks of social relations and understandings. A place is a coming together of trajectories, a thrown togetherness. I mean, just think of any space or any place here that she's talking about. Your place where you reside would have all of the people who've been living there, let's say, for the past 50 years, and then there are newer people who've come in, there are migrant workers, there are newer kinds of technologies that have come in, television and other media has brought in various forms of culture that perhaps didn't coexist, new commodities are being brought in, there are new imaginations that are unfolding as we move forward generationally and spatially, people are traveling, going out, coming back, bringing different ideas. So all of this materiality, ideas, people, and so on are thrown together to make that place, right? A place is a coming together of these trajectories. It is a thrown togetherness. So she really wants us to appreciate this idea about place rather than the closed and bounded, this is, how it should be, very parochial and xenophobic. I mean, this is also coming from, we see now there is that fear of immigrants, there's that fear of migrant populations coming in and somehow corrupting place. But place has always been about change, right? Places have always been about dynamism. So why think of them as these authentic, bounded entities as if they were formed out of the blue without any interaction with the outside? They are relational places. The next concept is power geometries, and for this, Doreen Massey writes, the notion of space as constituted through the practices of engagement and power geometries of relations, of restructuring of space, both through enclosure and through flow. So there is both. Through such relations and through an understanding of those relations as differentially and unequally empowering in their effects. A lot of her ideas about power geometry are coming from her observing her own situation in England with growing deindustrialization as she was growing up, and therefore an uneven spatial distribution of labor and capital. How some places become more impoverished whereas others begin to thrive. So how that is happening, there is a power geometry, she says. There are these lines, that imaginary lines, that shape our landscape, kind of similar to what Harvey spoke about in the uneven geographical development idea, but also in the way that colonialism and imperialism form power geometries where the world gets shaped into with unequal access to power. I'm going to end with this quote from Doreen Massey. Before I read out the quote, which I think is quite significant being this being a social theory class, I want to direct your attention to this one podcast called Spatial Delight, published by the Sociological Review. It's available online. I've given a link here. But this is largely speaking of Doreen Massey's work, and I highly encourage all of you to go back and hear that out. So let's read this quote and then end the class. She writes, if time unfolds as change, then space unfolds as interaction. In that sense, space is the social dimension, right? It is through space that we can conceptualize social relations, and it is in space that social relations form. It is space that gets altered with the altering of the social relations, and all of this is mutually constituted. So thank you so much and see you in next class. Bye.